1910, at the height of New York's Gilded Age, a beautiful 25-year-old heiress from one of the city's most powerful families walked out of her Fifth Avenue mansion to buy a book and a box of chocolates. She chatted with a friend on a crowded street, turned a corner, and was never seen again. She didn't just disappear, she evaporated from the face of the earth. Leaving behind a family desperate to protect its reputation, a secret lover, and a trail of clues so baffling that it would become the most enduring mystery of the 20th century. This is the story of Dorothy Arnold, the girl who vanished into thin air. Welcome to the dark chapters. In the twilight of the Gilded Age, New York City was a world of stark, glittering contrasts. While millions toiled in tenements and factories, a select few families lived in unimaginable splendor, their lives governed by the rigid, unspoken rules of high society. They were the city's royalty, shielded from the grit of the real world by immense fortunes and the high walls of their Fifth Avenue mansions. The Arnold family was firmly entrenched in this exclusive world. And at the heart of their story was a young woman named Dorothy Harriet Camille Arnold, an heiress who had everything a girl of her station could desire: wealth, beauty, social standing, and a prestigious education. But behind the facade of the perfect socialite, Dorothy harbored a secret ambition, a burning desire for a life of her own making. It was a dream that would put her on a collision course with her powerful family and, ultimately, lead her to walk out of her gilded cage one winter morning and vanish from the face of the earth. Dorothy was born into the lap of immense privilege in 1885. Her father, Francis R. Arnold, was a highly respected and enormously successful importer of fine goods, a man whose business acumen had built a family fortune worth millions. Her uncle was a Supreme Court justice. The Arnolds were not the flashy, new money type. They were part of the established, conservative elite, their name listed in the coveted social register, the definitive guide to who truly mattered in New York society. Their family home at 18 East 79th Street was a bastion of Victorian propriety, a place where tradition, reputation, and appearances were valued above all else. Francis Arnold ruled his family with an iron fist and a strict moral code. He was a product of his time, a patriarch who believed a woman's place was in the home, her ultimate purpose to marry well and manage a household. He adored his daughter, but he had a clear, unshakable vision for her life. She would be a lady of leisure. She would attend the right parties. She would associate with the right people, and she would eventually marry a man of equal or greater social standing. The idea of his daughter pursuing a career, of entering the grubby world of commerce or professional life, was not just distasteful to him, it was unthinkable. But Dorothy was not a typical society girl. She was bright, spirited, and possessed an intellect that could not be satisfied by teas and cotillions. Her family had provided her with the finest education available to a woman of her era, sending her to the prestigious Bryn Mawr College, one of the nation's top women's schools. There, she excelled. She majored in literature and language, immersing herself in the works of great writers. But Bryn Mawr gave her more than just an education. It gave her a taste of independence and a glimpse into a world where women were encouraged to have intellectual ambitions. It was here that Dorothy's secret dream was born. She wanted to be a writer. This was not a passing fancy. Upon graduating in 1905, she returned to the suffocating confines of her family home and began to pursue her literary ambitions in secret. She set up a small writing desk in her bedroom, which became her private sanctuary. She penned short stories and articles, pouring her hopes and frustrations onto the page. She would sneak her manuscripts out of the house, mailing them under a pseudonym to magazines like McClure's, one of the most popular publications of the day. And then she would wait anxiously for the postman, hoping for an acceptance letter that would validate her talent and give her the leverage she needed to confront her father. But the letters that came back were not acceptances. They were rejection slips, polite but firm dismissals of her work. One story she was particularly proud of was returned with a harsh critique, the editors writing that it was a well-constructed but ultimately uninspired tale. These rejections were a source of deep frustration for Dorothy. She felt trapped. She was a woman of means, yet she had no control over her own life or finances. Her father provided her with a generous allowance, but she had no independent wealth. She couldn't simply move out and start a life of her own in a place like Greenwich Village, as other aspiring female artists were beginning to do. Her identity was inextricably tied to her family's name and her father's control. Adding another layer of secrecy and conflict to her life was a forbidden romance. Dorothy had fallen in love with a man named George C. Griscom, Jr. He was a family friend, a man in his early 40s, significantly older than Dorothy, and, most damningly in her father's eyes, he came from a family with little money. To Frances Arnold, Griscom was an entirely unsuitable match for his daughter. He forbade the relationship, but Dorothy, defiant, continued to see him in secret. They would meet covertly in the city and maintained a steady stream of correspondence, their letters a testament to a relationship her family refused to acknowledge. Griscom became a symbol of the life she wanted, a life chosen by her, not for her. By the fall of 1910, the pressure on 25-year-old Dorothy was immense. Her friends were getting married and starting families, following the path prescribed for them. Dorothy, meanwhile, felt her own life was stagnating. Her literary career had failed to launch, and her love life was a secret she was forced to hide. In September, she confided in her family that she was deeply depressed, telling them, "My literary work is a failure. McClure's has turned me down. All I have to show for my work is a basket full of rejection slips." The gilded cage had begun to feel like a prison. She desperately needed to escape, to prove to herself and her family that she could make her own way in the world. As the winter approached, this quiet desperation would lead her to formulate a plan, a final, dramatic act to seize control of her own destiny, a plan she would set in motion on a cold, dramatic destiny when she walked out of her father's house and into a mystery that would endure for more than a century. The morning of December 12, 1910, broke cold and clear over New York City. A brisk winter wind swept down the avenues, but the sun was bright, promising a fine day for holiday shopping. Inside the stately Arnold mansion at 108 East 79th Street, the day began like any other. 25-year-old Dorothy Arnold came down for breakfast, dressed impeccably as always. She wore a tailored blue serge suit, a long velvet coat, and a small, stylish black hat adorned with a distinctive blue lining and elegant plumes. In her hands she carried a large sealskin muff, inside which she had tucked a wallet containing approximately $25, 0 cents to $30, 0 cents. A considerable sum for the time, equivalent to nearly $1,000 today. Her mood seemed perfectly normal, perhaps even a little brighter than it had been in recent weeks. The deep depression she had confessed to her family over her failed writing aspirations seemed to have lifted. She was cheerful and engaging as she spoke with her mother, casually outlining her plans for the day. She needed to buy a new dress for her younger sister's upcoming debutante party. She mentioned a specific dress she had seen advertised and told her mother she planned to walk down to Fifth Avenue to purchase it. She also needed to buy a book. It was a simple, mundane plan for a young woman of her social standing. After their conversation, Dorothy kissed her mother goodbye. Her mother watched from the window as she walked down the steps of their home at approximately 11 o'clock a.m., a familiar and elegant figure, disappearing into the bustling morning crowds. It was the last time her family would ever see her. Dorothy's path that day was not one of mystery, but of public, well-documented routine. She walked down the fashionable expanse of Fifth Avenue, a street teeming with shoppers, carriages, and the city's elite. Her first stop was Park and Tilford, a luxury grocer on the corner of 27th Street, where she purchased a half-pound box of chocolates, charging it to her family's account. From there, she strolled a few blocks to Brentano's, the famous bookstore. Here she browsed for some time before purchasing a book of light-hearted essays titled An Engaged Girl's Sketches. Again, she charged the purchase to her family's account. She was seen by clerks at both establishments, who later described her as being in good spirits, perfectly composed and polite. Nothing in her demeanor suggested she was a woman in distress or on the verge of a life-altering decision. Leaving Brentano's, she continued her walk down Fifth Avenue. It was here, around 2 o'clock p.m., near 27th Street, that the last confirmed, undisputed sighting of Dorothy Arnold occurred. She ran into a friend, a young woman named Gladys King, who was on her way home from a lunch engagement. The two friends stopped to chat for several minutes right there on the crowded sidewalk. Their conversation was light and cheerful. Gladys asked Dorothy where she was headed. Dorothy smiled and mentioned the book she had just bought at Brentano's. She then told Gladys something that would become one of the most scrutinized details in the entire case. She said she was going to take a walk home through Central Park. This statement seemed perfectly innocent, yet it struck Gladys as slightly odd. It was growing late in the afternoon on a cold winter day, not the most pleasant time for a stroll through the vast, sprawling park. But Dorothy's mood was so bright and untroubled that Gladys thought little of it. Dorothy told her friend that she had plans to meet her mother for lunch at the Waldorf Astoria later in the week. With a final wave and a promise to call, Dorothy Arnold smiled at her friend and turned to walk west in the direction of Central Park. Gladys King watched her go, a fashionable, confident figure in a blue suit and velvet coat, disappearing into the anonymous throng of the city. That single, fleeting moment on a busy sidewalk was the precipice of the mystery. It was the last time anyone could say with absolute certainty that they had seen Dorothy Arnold alive and well. She had, in effect, walked off the edge of the known world. Back at the Arnold mansion, the afternoon light began to fade and the lamps were lit. As evening approached and the family gathered for dinner, Dorothy had still not returned. Initially, there was no great alarm. A young woman of her social circle could easily be delayed, perhaps having decided to take tea with a friend or extend her shopping trip. But as the dinner hour came and went, and her place at the table remained empty, a quiet unease began to settle over the household. This was uncharacteristic of Dorothy. She was a dutiful daughter who, despite her private frustrations, adhered to the strict social schedule of her family. By late evening, the unease had blossomed into genuine fear. Her mother began to make telephone calls. The first calls were to Dorothy's closest friends, the young women she might have visited. Each call yielded the same answer. No one had seen her since her encounter with Gladys King that afternoon. The family checked with the relatives they thought she might have stopped to see. Again, nothing. The hours ticked by, each ring of the telephone bringing not relief, but another dead end. The vast, bustling city of New York, which had seemed a safe and familiar playground just that morning, now felt like a dark and threatening labyrinth that had swallowed their daughter whole. Despite their mounting terror, Frances Arnold made a fateful decision. They would not call the police. In his world, a world obsessed with reputation and avoiding scandal at all costs, involving the police was a last resort. He was convinced that a public investigation would drag the family's name through the mud, exposing them to the prurient curiosity of the tabloid press. He feared a story about a missing heiress would invite speculation of a secret elopement, a clandestine affair, or some other social disgrace. He was certain there was a logical explanation, and that involving the authorities would create a scandal where none existed. Instead of relying on the New York City police force, he decided to handle the matter himself. That night, as the city slept, Francis Arnold and his son John began their own desperate, private investigation, calling hospitals and morgues, their voices hushed, their questions laced with the dread they could not yet bring themselves to name. Their daughter was gone, and the search for Dorothy Arnold had begun, not with a bang, but with a series of frantic, terrified whispers in the dead of night. For 6 agonizing weeks, the disappearance of Dorothy Arnold was a secret kept locked tightly within the walls of the family mansion. Francis Arnold's obsession with avoiding a public scandal led him to conduct a desperate and expensive private war against the silence that had swallowed his daughter. He bypassed the official police force and instead hired the best private investigators money could buy, the legendary Pinkerton Detective Agency. The Pinkertons, famous for their relentless pursuit of outlaws in the Wild West, now turned their formidable resources to combing the sophisticated jungle of New York City. They operated in the shadows, interviewing Dorothy's friends, tracking down clerks who had seen her, and quietly investigating every hospital, morgue, and lodging house in the city and beyond. They followed every conceivable lead, no matter how faint, but every path led to a dead end. The trail went cold on the crowded sidewalk of Fifth Avenue, precisely where Gladys King had waved goodbye. The family's private search extended across the country and even to Europe. They placed discreet advertisements in newspapers, offering a substantial reward for any information. They followed Dorothy's secret lover, George Griscom, Jr., to Italy, where he was traveling. Pinkerton agents intercepted and questioned him, only to find a man who seemed genuinely heartbroken and as bewildered as everyone else. He had received a letter from Dorothy before she vanished, but its contents were cheerful and gave no hint of a plan to run away or harm herself. As the weeks dragged on, the private investigation cost Francis Arnold tens of thousands of dollars, a fortune at the time, but it yielded absolutely nothing. The silence from Dorothy was absolute. The city had kept its secret. Finally, with every private avenue exhausted and his hope dwindling, Francis Arnold had to confront the fact that his strategy had failed. His obsession with privacy had not protected his daughter. It had only given her trail 6 precious weeks to go cold. In late January 1911, he accepted defeat and did what he had dreaded from the beginning. He walked into a New York City police station and officially reported his daughter missing. The moment the news broke, it was like a match thrown on gasoline. The story of a beautiful, wealthy heiress vanishing in broad daylight was an irresistible sensation. Newspapers across the country, and indeed the world, seized upon the mystery. "Dorothy Arnold, Heiress, missing," screamed the headlines. The carefully guarded privacy of the Arnold family was shattered into a million pieces. Their lives became a public spectacle, and the investigation turned into a nationwide circus of speculation, rumor, and wild theories. The most immediate and obvious theory was that of foul play. The public imagination seized upon Dorothy's last known intention to take a walk through Central Park. The park, then as now, had a reputation as a place where danger could lurk. The papers painted lurid pictures of her being accosted by ruffians or fiends, dragged into the bushes, murdered, and her body hidden or thrown into the reservoir. The New York Police Department, now officially on the case, launched a massive, meticulous search of Central Park. They dredged the lake and the reservoir, their grappling hooks pulling up nothing but mud and debris. They combed every inch of the Ramble, the park's most secluded and densely wooded area. They found no trace of a struggle, No scrap of her distinctive clothing, no sign that she had ever even entered the park. Furthermore, the park was heavily patrolled, and on that clear winter day, it would have been filled with other walkers. It seemed unlikely that a violent abduction could have occurred without a single witness. With the foul play theory stalling, speculation turned to Dorothy's state of mind. Could she have suffered a sudden bout of amnesia? Perhaps she had been struck by a passing automobile, sustained a head injury that wiped her memory, and was now wandering the city as a Jane Doe, with no knowledge of her own identity. This theory prompted a massive, nationwide search of hospitals, clinics, and mental asylums. The police sent her photograph and description to institutions across the country, but no patient matched her description. Naturally, the theory of a secret elopement was one of the most popular. Had she run away with her forbidden lover, George Griscom Jr.? Or perhaps another, unknown suitor? This was the story the family feared most, the one that would cause the greatest social scandal. But it didn't add up. Dorothy had left almost all of her money and her fine jewelry behind. She had withdrawn no significant funds from her accounts, and Griscom himself had a solid alibi, an ocean away in Italy. The idea that she would orchestrate such a dramatic disappearance simply to escape her family seemed out of character for the dutiful, if frustrated, daughter. The possibility of suicide was also thoroughly explored. Her family had admitted she was depressed over her failed writing career. Perhaps the rejections had finally become too much to bear. But this theory also fell apart under scrutiny. She had no history of suicidal behavior, and her demeanor on the day she vanished was cheerful and forward-looking. She had plans to meet her mother for lunch later in the week. And most crucially, a suicide requires a body. Despite the extensive searches of the city's rivers and harbor, no trace of her was ever found. Then there were the darker, more scandalous whispers, the theories that were never printed in the mainstream papers but were discussed avidly in society drawing rooms and back-alley speakeasies. The most persistent of these was that Dorothy, pregnant and desperate, had sought out a clandestine abortion at a backroom clinic, and that the procedure had gone horribly wrong. In an era before legal abortion, these botched operations were a tragic and not uncommon cause of death for women. This theory suggested that the doctors, terrified of being charged with murder, had disposed of her body to cover up their crime. While there was absolutely no evidence to support this, it provided a plausible explanation for her complete disappearance. As the official investigation floundered, the public took over. The case became a national obsession, and with that obsession came an avalanche of fake sightings. A shop girl in San Francisco would swear she had just sold gloves to a woman who looked exactly like Dorothy Arnold. A banker in Boston would report seeing her in a hotel lobby. Letters poured in from across the country and Europe, each claiming to have seen the missing heiress. Each tip, no matter how outlandish, had to be investigated by the beleaguered police, costing time and resources and leading only to more frustration. The search for Dorothy Arnold was no longer a methodical investigation. It was a wild goose chase, a frantic hunt for a ghost who was seemingly everywhere and nowhere at once. Her true fate lost in a dizzying storm of rumor, speculation, and lies. While the public feasted on a smorgasbord of wild theories and the police chased phantom sightings across the country, a second, far more crucial investigation was happening behind the scenes. Francis Arnold, though he had finally and reluctantly involved the official authorities, never fully trusted them. His primary concern remained the preservation of the family's reputation. He believed the New York police were clumsy, indiscreet, and incapable of navigating the delicate social circles in which his daughter moved. And so, in parallel with the public circus, he hired his own man, a lawyer and trusted family friend named John S. Geyer. Geyer was a sharp, methodical investigator, and it was through his discreet inquiries that the carefully constructed facade of the Arnold family would begin to crack, revealing secrets that Francis Arnold had desperately and disastrously tried to keep hidden from the world. Geyer's investigation was not concerned with public opinion or sensational headlines. His sole focus was to find the truth, and he began by looking where the police had not been allowed to, inside the Arnold family itself. He interviewed the family members and servants at length, but his most important work was done inside Dorothy's private sanctuary, her bedroom on the 3rd floor of the mansion. It was here, in the space where Dorothy had dreamed her secret dreams, that Geyer made 2 discoveries that fundamentally changed the entire nature of the case. The first was found in the fireplace. Geyer noticed a significant amount of charred paper ash. Carefully sifting through the remains, he was able to determine that Dorothy, in the days or hours before she vanished, had systematically burned a large volume of personal papers. This was not a casual act. It was a deliberate and thorough purging of her private thoughts, letters, and, most significantly, her literary works. The rejected manuscripts she had lamented to her mother, the stories that were the source of her depression, she had destroyed them all. This was not the act of a woman planning to return home that evening for dinner. It was the act of someone erasing their past, wiping the slate clean before embarking on a new chapter. It suggested that her disappearance was not the result of a random abduction or a sudden bout of amnesia, but a premeditated, carefully planned event. The second, and even more explosive, discovery was a collection of letters that had escaped the fire. Tucked away in her desk, Geyer found a bundle of correspondence from steamship companies. Dorothy had been making inquiries, gathering brochures and schedules for transatlantic voyages to Europe. This was stunning. It provided a clear, potential escape route. It suggested that Dorothy may have planned to reinvent herself, to leave New York and her stifling family behind, and start a new life as a writer in the bohemian circles of Paris or London. These 2 discoveries, the burned papers and the steamship letters, painted a picture of a young woman who was not a passive victim, but the active architect of her own vanishing. These facts alone were enough to reshape the investigation, but they were secrets that Francis Arnold commanded Geyer to keep. To reveal that his daughter had planned to run away was, in his mind, a social disgrace almost as damaging as a scandalous elopement. But there was one more secret, the most important one of all, which Francis Arnold fought to conceal with every fiber of his being: the true nature of his daughter's relationship with George Griscom, Jr. Geyer's investigation confirmed that the connection between Dorothy and the 42-year-old Griscom was not a casual friendship, but a serious clandestine love affair. They had been meeting secretly for months. Dorothy had even lied to her family, using a female friend as a cover story to spend a week with Griscom at a Boston hotel. It was a deep, emotional entanglement that her father had discovered and furiously forbidden. He saw Griscom as a penniless, unsuitable older man seeking to take advantage of his daughter's fortune. The revelation of this secret affair would provide the single most powerful motive for Dorothy's disappearance. It offered a reason for her to flee, to escape a tyrannical father and be with a man she loved. For weeks, Francis Arnold suppressed this vital information. He presented a false narrative to the police and the public, painting his daughter as a happy, contented young woman with no troubles beyond a minor disappointment in her writing hobby. He allowed the police to waste precious time and resources chasing theories of random violence or amnesia, all while he held the very keys that might unlock the case. His pride, his obsession with the family's social standing was so absolute that he was willing to cripple the investigation into his own daughter's disappearance to avoid the taint of scandal. It was an untenable position. The truth eventually came out, likely leaked by John Geyer himself, who understood that he could not solve the case while his own client was actively obstructing it. When the police were finally informed of the secret romance, the burned letters, and the steamship inquiries, their entire focus shifted. The case was no longer about a girl who vanished in Central Park. It was about a desperate young woman who had orchestrated a meticulous escape plan. The new theory was that Dorothy, using the money her father had given her, had secretly booked passage on a ship to Europe under an assumed name, possibly to meet up with Griscom. The police now had a motive and a method. The revelation of these family secrets created a new public firestorm. Francis Arnold was widely condemned in the press for his arrogance and for misleading the investigation. He was no longer seen as just a grieving father, but as a controlling patriarch whose actions may have driven his daughter away and then actively hindered the search for her. The public, which had been so sympathetic, now saw a darker side to the story. Yet, even with these secrets revealed, the mystery only deepened. If Dorothy had sailed to Europe, she had done so with remarkable success. The police and the Pinkertons launched an exhaustive search of every passenger list for every ship that had departed from New York around the time of her disappearance. They found no one matching her description under any plausible assumed name. George Griscom Jr., tracked down and repeatedly questioned in Italy, was eventually cleared of any involvement. His letters from Dorothy showed affection, but they contained no plans for a secret rendezvous abroad. The family secrets, which had promised to solve the mystery, had only made it more complex. They explained why Dorothy might have wanted to disappear, but they did nothing to explain how she had so completely and utterly succeeded in doing so. The gilded cage had been unlocked, but the captive had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the ghost of her secrets. The revelation of the Arnold family secrets, which had promised to be the key to the entire mystery, ultimately served only to lock the door more tightly. The police now had a powerful motive for Dorothy's disappearance, a desperate desire to escape a tyrannical father and a stifling existence, and they had evidence of a meticulously planned escape. Yet, every lead that sprung from this new knowledge withered into a dead end. The exhaustive searches of steamship passenger lists turned up nothing. The intense scrutiny of her secret lover, George Griscom Jr., cleared him of any complicity. The puzzle was more maddening than ever. They now understood why she might have vanished, but the how and the where remained shrouded in an impenetrable fog. As months turned into years, the sensational headlines faded. The public, with no new developments to feast upon, slowly moved on to other scandals and mysteries. The official police investigation, having exhausted every possible avenue, was quietly shelved, joining the ranks of New York City's most frustrating and insoluble cold cases. But for the Arnold family, there was no moving on. The disappearance of Dorothy left a wound that would never heal, a ghost that would forever haunt the halls of their magnificent home. Francis Arnold, the proud patriarch whose obsession with reputation may have sealed his daughter's fate, was a broken man. He had spent over $100,000, 0 cents of his personal fortune, an astronomical sum in the early 20th century, on the private search for Dorothy. All to no avail. The public condemnation he faced for obstructing the initial investigation had shattered his once impeccable standing in society. He became a recluse, a man tormented by grief and, undoubtedly, by a profound and gnawing guilt. He and his wife, clinging to a sliver of hope, maintained Dorothy's bedroom exactly as she had left it, a pristine, silent shrine, waiting for a return that would never come. They believed, or forced themselves to believe, that she was still alive somewhere, living under an assumed name. But as the years passed, this hope became a form of self-torture. In 1922, Francis Arnold died, his health having declined steadily since his daughter vanished. On his deathbed, he made his remaining family promise that they would never reveal any new information about Dorothy's fate, should any ever come to light, ensuring that even in death, the family secrets would be protected. His wife followed him to the grave 6 years later, the mystery still unsolved. With the family's silence enshrined as a dying wish, the official story ended, but the legend was just beginning. In the absence of facts, one theory began to gain more credence among law enforcement officials and researchers who looked back on the case with fresh eyes: the dark and tragic possibility of a botched medical procedure. Years after the official investigation closed, a New York City district attorney who had been familiar with the case expressed his firm belief that this was the most likely solution. He theorized that Dorothy, desperate and possibly pregnant, had sought out an illegal abortion at a clandestine clinic. In this era, such procedures were notoriously dangerous, often performed by unqualified practitioners in unsanitary conditions. Theory provided a chillingly plausible explanation for her complete disappearance. If Dorothy had died during the procedure, the doctor, terrified of facing a murder charge, would have had a powerful motive to dispose of her body. Some have speculated that the body could have been incinerated in the clinic's furnace, leaving no trace. A notorious abortion clinic in a Bellevue hospital basement, run by a doctor with a dark reputation, was rumored to be a place where such tragedies occurred. This theory, though impossible to prove, neatly explained why no body was ever found, why her lover knew nothing of her plans, and why she had withdrawn a significant, but not enormous, amount of cash before she vanished. It painted Dorothy not as a master of escape, but as the tragic victim of a desperate, secret act. Over the decades, the case would be periodically revived by supposed deathbed confessions. In 1916, an inmate in a Rhode Island prison, Edward Glenn Norris, claimed on the eve of his execution that he had been hired for $150.00 to bury the body of a young woman in the cellar of a house near New York City. He claimed the woman had died after a failed surgical procedure performed by a doctor he knew. The details were tantalizing, and the police even excavated the cellar he indicated, but they found nothing. His story was ultimately dismissed as a desperate, last-ditch attempt by a condemned man to gain notoriety and delay his own death. More than a century has now passed since Dorothy Arnold kissed her mother goodbye and walked out into the winter morning. Her case endures as one of the great, defining mysteries of the 20th century, a story that continues to fascinate because it remains a perfect blank slate. Every theory, from a successful escape to a new life in Europe, to a tragic death in Central Park, to a secret abortion, is plausible. Yet none can be proven. She exists in the twilight between known fact and pure speculation. The story of Dorothy Arnold is more than just a missing person case. It's a window into a bygone era. It's a story about the stifling constraints placed upon women, even those of immense privilege, and the desperate lengths one might go to in order to find a small measure of freedom. It is a tragedy of family pride, a cautionary tale of how a father's obsession with appearances may have cost his daughter her life, or at the very least, any chance of being found. She is a ghost of the Gilded Age, a woman who had everything and nothing at the same time. She walked out of her gilded cage, and whether by design or by disaster, performed the perfect vanishing act, leaving behind only her name and an endlessly intriguing and eternally unsolved mystery. The mystery of Dorothy Arnold is more than just a missing person case. It's a ghost story from a bygone era, a cautionary tale of how family pride and dark secrets can swallow a person whole. Was she a victim of foul play, or the brilliant architect of her own escape? We may never know for sure, and her silence is what makes her story one of history's most compelling dark chapters. If you're fascinated by the mysteries that time refuses to solve and the human stories behind them, please subscribe to Dark Chapters and click the bell for our next journey into the shadows of the past.